I think you hit on a point here too. So when we're thinking about just for participants, when they're trying to, create targeted allocations and at least a risk profile and return profile, if things go the way you guys are expecting it from, potentially some more recessionary, headwinds coming up into the latter part of this year, and if interest rates do fall over the next year or two, what would you say to an investor? Hey, in a core fixed income, mutual fund that we have, what would your target rates of return be? Like a 6 to 8. How are you guys envisioning that? The reason why I ask is because right now, if you can go and get 4 to 5%, putting it in a 1 year, note, that obviously is very attractive. So there's that risk return that I think a lot of folks are struggling with right now.
Yeah, no doubt. I think we always got to be careful about sort of what's the return going to be. But I think if you say yourself, by the way, I should say we're not in the camp that we just expect that rates are going to plummet right away from here, right? The Fed has worked really hard. Global regulators are still working very hard to get rates to a point where they feel that they are restrictive enough, where they've raised the price of borrowing enough that people want to spend less, right? That's how eventually we sort of get inflation to really roll over, is people spending less. The challenge, of course, if they spend too much less, if we stop spending enough, right, we tip ourselves into a recession and they are forced to cut rates. So it's a balancing act, but we do think that the Fed is going to try and hold rates elevated for an extended period of time. So we're not in the camp of, hey, we expect rate cuts by the end of the year, or we expect, Fed funds will be back down to 3% next year. So I don't think that the reason to buy fixed income is to just buy fixed income because yields will fall. I think that feels like a tempting proposition to a lot of investors of, I'll just sort of wait on the sidelines. I'll sit in cash or stable value or money market fund or deposits because the yields on the front end of the curve are the best I've been able to get in years. And then I'll sort of perfectly time this jump and add some fixed income right before yields fall. And I'll really do that. First of all, the reason and the timing of Fed cuts is very tough to predict. The last several times they've had to cut rates after raising them, it was for things like the pandemic or 9/11 or when and where the housing bubble sort of finally burst. These are not things that you could sort of look ahead and say, all right, next month is when they're going to do it. So it's always easy on a rear view to sort of see it on the timeline. Of
course, yeah.
That was the moment. So I think anyone who's saying I'm going to make this perfect moment, I'll wait for this Goldilocks period where I can perfectly jump and I'll get this benefit of falling yields, I just think it's really tough to do. I think the data proves out that very few people do that. In fact, if you look at a chart of money market fund assets, the amount of money invested in money market mutual funds over time, right? It's this mountain chart that almost only goes up and is now sitting at an all-time high of about $5.5 trillion. And if you look at if you superimpose on that a chart or a graph of the Fed funds rate, even when it goes to zero, money fund assets go up. So people are sitting at money market funds, getting the highest level they've been able to get in whatever time period. Rates go to zero, they keep adding more to money market funds. So it's tough to do to get that Goldilocks jump right. Very few people actually do it. And there's a cost before that even happens. And what I mean by that is while the front end of the curve is undoubtedly the most attractive it has been since 2007, almost every spot on the curve, when we talk about the yield curve, is at or near it's the highest it's been in 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
So it's not just that, hey, the front end is finally attractive and everything else is about where it's been. Everywhere is more attractive, right? In the last 10 or 12 years, right, since the financial crisis, investors put more than $1 trillion into just the Morningstar Core and Core Plus bond categories. Just those two categories for fixed income got more than $1 trillion of inflows, and all of that at yields lower than what are on offer today. So if you like the 10-year at 2.5%, can I show you a 10-year treasury at 3.8% yield, right? It's just, it's better all in income and more air in the balloon to eventually, if and when yields do come down, give you some of that higher total return. In fact, we look at rates not just on the front end, but across the curve. And in our opinion, the 10-year yield has probably peaked for the cycle. We think it probably hit its highest point last October of 2022. Since
Yep.
then, the 10-year is up almost 7% on a total return basis. Whereas a money market fund or very, very front-end treasuries might have returned a little over 3% in that time period. So
Correct.
even though the yield is higher on the money market fund than the 10-year treasury, because you have gotten some of that pull already, the total return is almost twice as high for having some of that exposure. So I think that's the risk for a lot of investors of, it feels good to sort of sit on the front end. I'm earning a lot of income and I'll make some big move, which is tough to find. They probably won't do it. And they're already experiencing, in our opinion, an opportunity cost of waiting.
Yep.
Now, I will also just add quickly that we also don't think it has to be all or nothing. Cash investors have been so starved for income for so long. This is a great environment for them. Any of us, all of us who have cash needs, who are saving, if you're a corporation and you're using daily flows for, payrolls or sort of day-to-day expenses. If you're just an individual investor like you and me, and you're saving to put a down payment on a car, or you're going to help your kid go to college or make a purchase in the next year, this is a fantastic time to use those sort of front-end cash, money market fund deposits, right? Instruments where you're not taking a lot of risk, but you're finally getting some real income. But for that, those other allocations where I think you could have exposures sort of further out into fixed income, again, I think this is a really attractive time to put some of that to work. And I don't think you need to sort of pick, there's not one spot that's the right spot and everything else is like a bad idea. I think that the good news is here, you can sort of diversify some of those exposures around. So you could keep some in that cash position where you're getting the value, put some on sort of the front end of the curve, right? Maybe a short-term bond, a 2-year sort of target maturity, put some more a little bit further out, something more intermediate, focused on the ag, have some higher quality, right? Whatever's best for your risk return profile. I don't think you need to sort of pick one and sort of cross your fingers. I think this is an environment where you can diversify, and that as yields eventually do normalize, you get the benefit of that shift a couple of different times, a couple of different ways, as opposed to sort of trying to pick one big brave bet. So I think that's a good spot for fixed income investors to be in. But that lull of, I'll just get it exactly right and I'll wait, I think a lot of people end up waiting and they end up missing out, and then they just sort of miss out.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same as with equity investors, right? When they're sitting in cash and everyone wants to time, right now, right, there's concern the market could fall. Well, the market's run, pretty tremendously over the last month and a half, and everyone keeps calling for it to come back down, and we keep getting, these little spurts. So, whether fixed income, equity markets, obviously, it's always very difficult to time. Right. And I think you also highlight a really important factor is, you may see a 4 or 5% yield on, some total, return bond fund, but when you factor in the excess return, if interest rates do come in, they become even more attractive. So I think that's really important, for investors to remember.